He thought she was just a waitress he could buy with a black card and a condescending smile. He thought the grease stain on her apron defined her worth. But Harrison Sterling, the city's most arrogant real estate mogul, was about to make the most expensive mistake of his life. Because the woman pouring his coffee wasn't just serving him, she was deciding whether or not to destroy his entire empire. She didn't just work in the city, she owned half of it. This is the story of how a billionaire flirted with his own boss and lost everything. The rain over Manhattan wasn't just rain, it was a cold grey curtain that separated the haves from the have-nots. Inside Lobsidian, the city's most exclusive private members club on 57th Street, the weather was irrelevant. Here the air smelled of aged mahogany Davidoff cigars and money. Old money. Harrison Sterling checked his reflection in the darkened window. At 34, he was the prodigy of New York real estate. He wore a bespoke Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's cars, and on his wrist sat a Patek Philippe Nautilus that he liked to tap impatiently against glass surfaces. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, jawline like a cliff edge, eyes like cold coins. "You're checking yourself out again, Harrison." A voice drawled from the leather armchair behind him. Harrison turned, flashing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just admiring the view, Carter. My building is going up right across the street, the Sterling Spire. It's going to block the sun for 3 blocks. It's poetic, isn't it?" Carter, a man who had inherited his millions rather than fought for them, swirled his scotch. "It's aggressive, just like you. Speaking of aggressive, look at the service tonight. It's abysmal." Harrison followed Carter's gaze. Lobsidian was understaffed tonight. A flu bug had taken out half the regular crew, and the management had scrambled to bring in agency staff. Among the sea of tuxedoed, stiff upper-lip waiters, one figure stood out. She was a woman perhaps in her late 20s, struggling with a heavy tray of silver turines. She had messy chestnut hair pulled back in a utilitarian clip, escaping in frizzy tendrils around a face that was scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked tired. She looked frantic. She looked simple. "New girl." Harrison noted his voice dropping an octave. "Look at her. She's terrified. Probably used to slinging hash at a diner in Queens, not serving beluga caviar to the masters of the universe." "She's pretty, though," Carter noted, adjusting his glasses. "In a help-me-I'm-poor sort of way." Harrison chuckled a low, cruel sound. "Watch this." He raised a hand, snapping his fingers with a sharp, cracking sound that cut through the low hum of conversation in the room. It was a gesture of supreme disrespect, the kind of thing you do to a dog, not a human being. The waitress froze. She turned, balancing the heavy tray, her eyes locking onto Harrison. They were green, startlingly deeply green, and for a second, Harrison felt a weird jolt. But he suppressed it. She hurried over, setting the tray down on a side stand before approaching their table. "Yes, sir." Her voice was calm, raspy. She didn't apologize for the wait. That annoyed him. "We've been empty for 10 minutes, Harrison said, gesturing to his glass. "I don't pay $40,000 a year in membership fees to watch you practice your balancing act. Scotch. Neat. And bring the bottle." The waitress looked at him. Most people flinched when Harrison used his boardroom voice. She didn't. She just blinked. "The bar is backed up, sir. I'll get it as soon as I can." "I didn't ask about the bar's logistics." Harrison leaned forward, invading her personal space. "I asked for my drink. What's your name?" She hesitated. "Sadie." "Sadie," Harrison repeated, tasting the name like cheap wine. "Well, Sadie, do you know who I am?" Sadie shifted her weight to one leg. She looked bored. "A man who is very thirsty." Carter choked on his drink, stifling a laugh. Harrison's eyes narrowed. The audacity. "I am Harrison Sterling," he said, slowly enunciating every syllable. "I own the building you're standing in. Well, my firm manages the lease. I could have you fired before you pour that drink. So let's try this again. Scotch. Now." Sadie stared at him for a long, uncomfortable silence. Then a small, unreadable smile touched her lips. It wasn't a smile of submission. It was the smile of someone watching a child throw a tantrum in a supermarket. "Right away, Mr. Sterling," she said softly. As she walked away, Harrison watched her. The uniform was ill-fitting baggy trousers, a vest that was too tight. She looked completely out of place in the velvet-draped luxury of the club. "I bet you $1,000 I can get her number," Harrison said, turning back to Carter. "And I bet I can get her to come back to the penthouse tonight." Carter raised an eyebrow. "She looks like she hates you." "They all hate me at first." Harrison smoothed his silk tie. "That's just the negotiation phase. She's a waitress, Carter. Everyone has a price, especially someone wearing shoes that worn out." Harrison glanced down at Sadie's retreating figure. He noticed her shoes, sensible black, non-slip rubber soles, worn at the heel. He felt a surge of superiority. He was going to play with her, a little cat-and-mouse game to pass the rainy evening. He had no idea that the worn-out shoes were a specific choice. He had no idea that Sadie was short for Serafina, and he certainly had no idea that Serafina Kensington, the woman he just snapped his fingers at, was currently the majority shareholder of the bank that held all of Harrison Sterling's loans. He was flirting with the executioner. Sadie walked into the service kitchen, the heavy swing doors, cutting off the drone of rich men's voices. She let out a long breath and leaned against the stainless steel counter. "You okay, Sadie?" It was Marco, the club's general manager. He was sweating, looking terrified. He hurried over to her, wringing his hands. Sadie, please, you don't have to do this. If the board finds out I let the Serafina Kensington bus tables, I'll be deported. I don't even know where, but they'll deport me." Sadie held up a hand. "Relax, Marco. I told you I needed to clear my head. My therapist said I need to reconnect with reality. Besides, I wanted to see how the new operations team is handling the floor service. The service is terrible, by the way. We need to talk about staffing levels on Tuesday." Marco gulped. "Yes, of course. But that table, table 4, that's Harrison Sterling." "I know," Sadie said, her eyes darkening. "We've corresponded. His company Sterling Arch has been petitioning my holding group for a lease renewal on the West Side Docks project. He's desperate for that land." "He's a shark," Marco warned. "He's a guppy in a shark suit," Sadie corrected, grabbing a bottle of Macallan 25. "And he's rude. He thinks I'm a temp agency hire." "Are you going to tell him?" "God, no," Sadie smirked. "This is getting interesting. He wants to play big shot. Let him play. I want to see how he treats people when he thinks there are no consequences. It'll help me decide on his lease renewal." Sadie adjusted her apron, took the expensive bottle, and walked back out onto the floor. She approached table 4. Harrison was laughing loudly at something Carter had said, but he stopped the moment she arrived. He watched her pour the amber liquid into the crystal glass. She did it perfectly, no spills, exact measure. "Better," Harrison murmured. He reached out his fingers, brushing against her hand. It was intentional. "You have steady hands, Sadie. You an artist, a student." "Just working, sir," Sadie replied, pulling her hand away. "Hard work carrying trays," Harrison said, leaning back and crossing his legs. "You know I'm known for spotting talent. I look at a rundown building and I see a palace. I look at you. He paused for dramatic effect. And I see someone who's tired of the grind. Sadie met his gaze. I'm quite happy, thank you. Are you? Harrison scoffed. You're working the late shift on a Tuesday in a room full of men who don't look you in the eye. Look, I'll be blunt. I'm having a small gathering at my place later, the penthouse at the Centurion. Just a few friends. Why don't you clock out? I'll pay the club for your time. Triple your nightly wage. Carter looked away, embarrassed. It was a crude, clumsy pickup line, masked as generosity. Sadie felt a cold spike of anger in her chest. It wasn't just the sexual harassment. It was the assumption that she was a commodity, that her time, her dignity could be bought for the price of a few hours of minimum wage. I can't leave my shift, Mr. Sterling, Sadie said coolly, and I'm not for sale. Harrison laughed, shaking his head. Everyone is for sale, Sadie. It's just a matter of currency. Maybe you don't want money. Maybe you want experience, a glimpse of how the other half lives. He pulled a business card from his pocket. It was heavy cream stock, gold leaf lettering. Harrison Sterling, CEO Sterling Arch. He slid it across the table. I'm working on a massive deal right now. The Kensington account. Do you know the name Kensington? Sadie's heart skipped a beat. She kept her face perfectly still. I've heard of it. Old money. Ancient, dusty, boring money. Harrison dismissed with a wave of his hand. The current head of the family is some recluse woman. Never seen her. Probably 80 years old and surrounded by cats. I'm going to charm her out of her prime real estate next week. When I do, I'm going to own this city. He looked at Sadie with a predatory grin. Stick with me, Sadie. I'm the future. You could be part of the ride. Sadie looked at the card. She looked at the man who just called her Seraphina Kensington, age 29, Yale graduate and philanthropist, an 80-year-old with cats. The irony was delicious. It was intoxicating. You seem very confident, Mr. Sterling, Sadie said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But be careful. Sometimes the old money bites back. Harrison laughed loud and barking. Honey money doesn't bite, it just buys. Now bring us the check, and write your number on the back. He turned away, dismissing her again. Sadie walked back to the POS terminal. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the hunt. She typed in the order. Then she pulled out her phone and sent a text message to her chief legal officer, Arthur Penhaligon. Text. Pause the Sterling Arch lease review. I need a full audit of Harrison Sterling's personal liquidity and his current debt leverage. Tonight. Prepare the kill switch clause. She put the phone away and printed the check. Harrison Sterling wanted a number. She would give him one. But it wouldn't be her phone number. She walked back to the table and placed the black leather folder down. The check, sir. Harrison didn't even look at the total. He threw a black American Express Centurion card onto the table. Add a $500 tip, and don't forget the digits. Sadie processed the card. When she returned, she handed him the receipt. On the back, she had written a number. Harrison snatched it up, grinning at Carter. I told you. Too easy. He flipped the receipt over. His smile faltered. It wasn't a phone number. It was a date. October 14th, 1929. What is this? Harrison frowned, looking up at her. Is this your birthday? You look good for 90. It's the date of the Wall Street crash, Sadie said, her voice sharp as cut glass. When the market collapsed. It's a reminder, Mr. Sterling. Bubbles burst, and arrogant men fall. Harrison stared at her. For the first time, the confidence cracked. There was something in her tone, something regal, something dangerous that didn't match the waitress uniform. Who are you? He asked, his voice losing its mocking edge. I'm just the help. Sadie smiled. Have a good night, boys. She turned and walked away. Harrison watched her go, a strange unease settling in his gut. She's weird, Carter said, breaking the tension. Let's go. We have the after party at the loft. Harrison nodded, shoving the receipt into his pocket. He shook off the feeling. She was nobody. Just a waitress who read too many history books. But as they walked out into the rainy New York night, Harrison's phone buzzed. It was an email notification from his bank. Alert credit line review initiated by guarantor. He frowned. That was odd. He had no idea that the waitress had just made the first move in a game of chess that would leave him gasping for air. The next morning, Harrison Sterling's office in the financial district was a shrine to his own ego. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Hudson River, but Harrison wasn't looking at the water. He was staring at his tablet, his face a mask of irritation. Why is the Kensington Trust stalling? He barked. His personal assistant, a young man named David, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, flinched. They sent a memo this morning, sir. They said the review board has concerns about the cultural impact of the Sterling spire. They want to ensure the neighborhood's heritage is preserved. Heritage? Harrison threw the tablet onto his mahogany desk. It's a warehouse district, David. The only heritage there is rat infestations and rust. This is that old woman, Seraphina Kensington. She's playing games. He stood up and paced. Get me into the Golden Rose Gala tonight. I know tickets are sold out. Buy a table. Buy 2 tables. I don't care what it costs. The Kensington matriarch always attends her family's charity event. I'm going to corner her between the appetizers and the main course, and I'm going to make her sign that lease. Yes, sir, David typed furiously. One more thing. Who will be your +1? The press will be there. Page 6 has been asking if you're seeing anyone. Harrison paused. He usually took models, tall, silent women who looked good in arm candy photos and didn't ask questions about interest rates. But last night at Lobsidian, that waitress, Sadie, she had stuck in his mind. Not just because of her looks, but because of that defiance. A twisted idea formed in his mind. The Kensington Trust was all about charity and helping the less fortunate. What better way to charm an old philanthropist biddy than to show up with a project? If he walked in with a supermodel, he looked like a playboy. If he walked in with a struggling waitress, he was mentoring. He looked like a philanthropist. I have a date. Harrison grinned. I'm going to do a good deed, David. I'm going to give a Cinderella story to a nobody. 3 hours later, Harrison's black Maybach pulled up to the service entrance of Lobsidian. It was early afternoon, the time when staff prepped for the dinner rush. Harrison walked in through the back door, ignoring the staff-only sign. The kitchen smelled of reducing stocks and bleach. He spotted Sadie immediately. She was polishing wine glasses, holding them up to the light with critical precision. You missed a spot, Harrison said, leaning against the doorframe. Sadie didn't jump. She lowered the glass and looked at him. She was wearing jeans and a black t-shirt. Today her hair in a messy bun. She looked even more ordinary than the night before. Mr. Sterling, she said dryly. Are we lost? The dining room is that way. I'm not here to eat. I'm here to offer you a job. Well, a gig. Sadie raised an eyebrow. I already have a job. Serving drinks to old men, please. Harrison walked closer, his Italian leather shoes clicking on the linoleum. Tonight is the Golden Rose Gala. It's the biggest event of the season. Tickets are $10,000 a plate. I want you to come with me. Sadie paused. She felt a bubble of laughter rising in her chest. The Golden Rose Gala was her event. She was the chairwoman of the board. She had personally approved the floral arrangements, white hydrangeas, no roses this year that morning. You want to take me? She pointed to her stained t-shirt. Why? Call it an experiment. Harrison lied smoothly. I'm tired of the fake women in my circle. I want something authentic, real. Plus, I think you deserve a night off. I'll pay you $5,000 for the evening. All you have to do is wear a dress smile and nod when I talk. Sadie studied him. She saw exactly what he was doing. He wanted a prop. He wanted to parade the poor girl around to soften his shark-like image. It was offensive, patronizing, and utterly disgusting. It was also the perfect opportunity to destroy him. I don't have a dress, Sadie said, her voice dropping to a shy whisper. I'll handle that. Harrison checked his watch. My driver will pick you up in 2 hours. We're going to a boutique on Madison Avenue. Don't be late, Sadie. Punctuality is the first lesson of success. He turned to leave, then stopped. Oh, and scrub your fingernails. The people we're meeting tonight judge everything. As the door swung shut behind him, Sadie set the glass down. Her expression shifted from confused waitress to cold executive. She pulled out her phone and dialed Arthur. Arthur, it's Serafina. Ms. Kensington. Arthur's voice was warm. Are we ready for the gala tonight? The donors are excited to see you. It's been 3 years since your last public appearance. There's a slight change of plans, Sadie said, a wicked glint in her green eyes. I will be attending, but I won't be arriving as Serafina Kensington. I'll be arriving as the guest of Harrison Sterling. There was a long silence on the line. Harrison Sterling, the man we're currently investigating, the man you ordered a liquidity audit on. The very same. He thinks I'm a waitress named Sadie. He's bringing me as his charity case. Arthur chuckled a dry, dusty sound. That man has a death wish he isn't even aware of. What are your instructions for the staff? No one is to acknowledge me as Serafina until I give the signal, she commanded. Let the valet, the security, and the board members know. If anyone calls me Ms. Kensington before I'm ready, they're fired. I want to see how far Harrison pushes this charade. Understood, Arthur said. And the dress? He's buying it, Sadie smiled. Let's hope he has good taste. I'd hate to ruin his career while wearing polyester. The boutique Harrison chose was flashy. It was the kind of place that put logos on everything, so you knew how much it cost. He sat on a velvet sofa, sipping complimentary champagne, while the sales assistants buzzed around Sadie like flies. No, not the blue, Harrison commanded, waving a hand without looking up from his phone. Too subdued. Put her in the red, the sequins. I want her to pop. Sadie stood in the dressing room, staring at the dress he had chosen. It was a monstrosity of scarlet sequins cut too low in the front and too high in the leg. It screamed, expensive mistress, not elegant companion. It was the kind of dress a man chooses when he wants to show off his property. She sighed. The things I do for justice, she thought. She put it on. It fit perfectly. She had a model's figure underneath the baggy waiter clothes, a fact that seemed to surprise the sales assistants. But she refused to wear the gaudy rhinestone necklace Harrison had picked out. I'll wear my own, she told the assistant. Mr. Sterling insisted on the diamonds, the assistant whispered nervously. Tell him the clasp is broken, Sadie said firmly. From her purse, a battered canvas tote, she pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a simple platinum chain with a single teardrop diamond. It looked modest to the untrained eye. In reality, it was the Star of Delft, a flawless 12-carat stone that had been in the Kensington family for 4 generations. It was worth more than the entire boutique. When she walked out, Harrison looked up. He blinked. For a second, the arrogance vanished. She looked stunning. The cheap flashiness of the dress was somehow tempered by her natural grace. She stood tall, her neck long, the diamond resting in the hollow of her throat, catching the light. "Not bad," Harrison said, recovering his composure. "You clean up well, Sadie. Just remember tonight, don't speak unless spoken to. These people are sharks. They'll eat a little minnow like you alive." "I'll try to be brave," Sadie said, lowering her eyes. The arrival at the Metropolitan Museum where the gala was held was chaos. A sea of paparazzi lined the red carpet flashbulbs, popping like strobe lights. Limousines idled, depositing senators, movie stars, and tech moguls. When Harrison's car pulled up, he checked his tie in the mirror. "Showtime. Stick to my side. If you get overwhelmed, just look at me." The door opened. Harrison stepped out first, buttoning his jacket, waving to the cameras. He reached back and pulled Sadie out. As Sadie's foot touched the red carpet, a strange thing happened. The photographers who had been shouting, "Harrison, Mr. Sterling over here," suddenly stopped. A ripple of confusion went through the press line. Lenses zoomed in. One veteran photographer from the Times lowered his camera, squinted, and then nudged the guy next to him. "Is that— It can't be," the other guy whispered. "She never comes out." "It's her. Look at the necklace. That's the Kensington Star." Suddenly the shouting changed. It wasn't Harrison anymore. It was a chaotic wall of noise, but underneath, people were screaming a name Harrison couldn't quite make out over the ringing in his ears. "Over here, Mom. To the left. Please." Harrison beamed, waving enthusiastically, his hand firmly gripping Sadie's waist. "They love us," he shouted over the noise to her. "I told you, you're with the King of New York tonight." Sadie smiled a tight, polite smile. She wasn't looking at the cameras. She was looking at the security chief at the top of the stairs, a man named Gregor, who had been her bodyguard for 10 years. Gregor's eyes went wide. He started to step forward, his hand moving to his earpiece. "Eagle is in the nest," he was about to say. Sadie caught his eye and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of her head. "Stand down." Gregor froze, confused, then stepped back into position, his face a mask of professional stoicism. They reached the top of the stairs. Harrison handed their tickets to the event coordinator. "Harrison Sterling," he announced loudly, "and guest." The coordinator, a high-strung woman with a clipboard, looked up. She saw Harrison. Then she looked at the guest. Her jaw literally dropped. She gasped, dropping her pen. Miss," she stammered, her face draining of color. Sadie stepped forward, linking her arm tighter through Harrison's. "Sadie," she said sharply, staring the woman down. "My name is Sadie, Mr. Sterling's guest." The coordinator looked from the billionaire to the woman who signed her paychecks. She saw the warning in Serafina's eyes. "Right, of course. Welcome. Sadie. Mr. Sterling. Table 4. Harrison chuckled as they walked into the great hall. "God, did you see her?" She was shaking. "I have that effect on people. They know the Sterling name." "I'm sure that's what it was," Sadie murmured. The great hall was transformed into a winter garden. White silk draped the ceilings, and 1,000 candles flickered. The elite of the city were there. As Harrison steered her through the crowd, the dynamic continued. They would approach a group, CEOs, politicians, socialites. Harrison would start talking loud and confident. "Gentlemen, good to see you. You know the Sterling Spire is breaking ground next month." The people would listen politely, but their eyes would drift to the woman standing silently beside him. Their eyes would widen. Confusion. Panic. Recognition. A senator heavily indebted to the Kensington Bank actually spilled his wine when he saw her. "Harrison." The senator choked out, his eyes glued to Sadie. Who is this?" "This is Sadie." Harrison patted her shoulder patronizingly. "She's a friend. First time at an event like this. I'm showing her the ropes." The senator looked like he was about to have a stroke. "Showing her the ropes. She's a quick learner." Harrison winked. "Sadie, go get me a drink, will you? The waiter missed us." The silence in the circle was deafening. You could hear a pin drop. Harrison Sterling had just ordered Seraphina Kensington, the wealthiest woman on the East Coast, to fetch him a cocktail. Sadie didn't blink. "Vodka tonic." "Scotch," Harrison corrected. "Run along." Sadie turned and walked toward the bar. As soon as she was out of earshot, the senator grabbed Harrison's arm. "Harrison, are you insane? Do you know who that is?" "Relax, Bob." Harrison laughed. "She's a waitress from Lobsidian. Cute, right? I picked her up yesterday. I'm doing a My Fair Lady thing." The senator stared at him, with a mixture of horror and pity. He opened his mouth to speak, but then he looked at Sadie's retreating figure. She turned back and caught the senator's eye. She put a finger to her lips. "Shh." The senator closed his mouth. He realized something Harrison didn't. If Seraphina Kensington was playing a game, you didn't spoil it unless you wanted your funding cut. "You're a brave man, Harrison," the senator said weakly. "A very brave man." "Fortune favors the bold, Bob." Harrison clapped him on the back. Harrison scanned the room. "Now where is that old hag, Seraphina Kensington? I need to find her before dinner starts. I bet she's in a wheelchair in the corner." He didn't notice the entire room watching him, waiting for the guillotine to fall. Dinner was served in the great hall, a cavernous space, echoing with the clinking of silver against bone china. Harrison Sterling sat at the head of table 4, a prime spot near the stage. He was in high spirits, fueled by 3 scotches, and the delusion that the hushed whispers rippling through the room were out of admiration for his suit. Sadie sat to his right. She had barely touched her food. "Eat up," Harrison whispered, nudging her with his elbow. "This is squab. Pigeon, basically. But rich people call it squab, so they can charge $50 a plate. You probably won't see food this good again for a while." Sadie looked at the perfectly roasted bird. She had personally approved the menu with the catering chef, Jean-Luc, 2 months ago. She knew exactly where the squab came from, a sustainable farm in the Hudson Valley that she funded. "It's delicious," Sadie said quietly. "It's a little dry," Harrison critiqued loud enough for the table to hear. He turned to the woman on his left, a terrifyingly sharp-eyed matron named Beatrice Vanderbilt, who sat on the museum board. "Don't you agree, Beatrice, the Kensington standards seem to be slipping? I heard the old lady is losing her touch. Maybe senile." Beatrice choked on her water. She looked at Harrison. Then she looked at Sadie. Beatrice's eyes were wide with panic. She had known Seraphina Kensington since Seraphina was in diapers. I wouldn't say that Mr. Sterling," Beatrice stammered, her voice trembling. "Ms. Kensington is very much in control." "Please," Harrison scoffed. "She hasn't shown her face. The program said she was supposed to give the welcome address at 7:00 p.m. It's 7:15. She's either asleep or she's forgotten where she is." Harrison stood up, buttoning his jacket. He checked his reflection in a spoon. "Where are you going?" Sadie asked, a sharp edge entering her voice. "Someone needs to save this disaster," Harrison declared. "The room is dead. The energy is low. I'm going to go up there, say a few words, and rally the donors. It'll look good for the Sterling Arch brand. Leadership, Sadie. Watch and learn." "Harrison, sit down," Sadie said, and this time it wasn't a request. It was a command. "You are not on the program. I make my own program." He winked at her. "Don't worry, honey. I'll give you a shout-out." He strode toward the stage, ignoring the frantic gestures of the event coordinator, who was standing in the wings. Harrison Sterling didn't wait for permission. He walked up the steps, approached the microphone, and tapped it. Thump, thump. The sound boomed through the hall. The orchestra stopped playing. 500 of New York's wealthiest and most powerful people turned their heads. When they saw Harrison Sterling at the podium, a confused murmur broke out. But when they saw who was sitting at table 4, calmly sipping water, the murmur died into a terrified silence. They knew what was happening. They were watching a man walk into a propeller. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Harrison boomed, flashing his $1,000,000 smile. "I know you were expecting the elusive Miss Kensington, but it seems she's indisposed. Napping, perhaps. Or maybe she got lost in her own museum." He laughed. Nobody else did. The silence was thick, heavy, and suffocating. Harrison faltered for a microsecond, confused by the lack of applause. But he ploughed on. "I'm Harrison Sterling, CEO of Sterling Arch. We're building the future of this city. And speaking of the future, we have to look at who we're leaving behind." He gestured dramatically toward table 4. "Tonight I brought a special guest, a young woman named Sadie." A spotlight swiveled, blinding Sadie. She didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, her face an unreadable mask of stone. "Sadie is a waitress," Harrison announced, his voice oozing false benevolence. "She serves drinks at a club most of you are members of. Yesterday she was invisible to me. Today she's dining with kings. I brought her here to show her what's possible if you work hard, to show her that even a simple girl with worn-out shoes can touch the stars if only for a night." A collective gasp went through the room. It wasn't a gasp of awe. It was a gasp of horror. He had just called the owner of the city simple and mocked her shoes in front of her own employees, friends, and business rivals. At the back of the room, Arthur Penhaligon, the chief legal officer of the Kensington Trust, slowly took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Oh, you poor, dumb bastard," Arthur whispered. Harrison, oblivious to the atmosphere, raised his glass. "So let's raise a toast to charity, to helping the little people, and to the Sterling Spire coming soon to the West Side, once I get Miss Kensington to finally sign the papers." He drank. He waited for applause. There was none. Instead, there was the sound of a single chair scraping against the floor. At table 4, Sadie stood up. She didn't stand up like a waitress. She stood up like a queen rising from a throne. She picked up her napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. Then she began to walk toward the stage. "Ah, Sadie," Harrison said into the mic, sweating slightly now. "Coming up to say thank you. No need, no need. Go back to your seat." Sadie didn't stop. She walked up the stairs, the red sequins of her dress shimmering like armor. She walked past the podium, past Harrison, and signaled to the sound technician in the wings. The technician, who knew exactly who signed his checks, immediately cut Harrison's microphone. "Hey." Harrison tapped the dead mic. "What's going on?" Sadie reached out and took a handheld microphone from a stand. She turned to face the room. Then she turned to face Harrison. The look in her eyes had changed. The shyness was gone. The fear was gone. In their place was a cold, terrifying intellect. "Harrison," she said. Her voice was amplified, clear, and commanding. It wasn't the raspy waitress voice anymore. It was the polished transatlantic accent of a Yale-educated aristocrat. "You asked where Seraphina Kensington was?" Harrison blinked, confused by the change in her voice. "Yes." "Sadie, what are you doing? You're drunk. You said she was probably napping or lost." Sadie took a step closer to him. The heels she was wearing, Manolo Blahniks, which she had swapped into in the car, clicked ominously on the stage. "She wasn't lost, Harrison. She was serving you scotch." For a solid 10 seconds, Harrison Sterling's brain refused to process the information. It was too absurd, too impossible. What? He laughed nervously. Sadie, seriously, sit down. You're embarrassing yourself. Sadie turned to the crowd. Arthur Penhaligon stood up from table 1. Yes, Ms. Kensington. The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Harrison's face went slack. He looked at Arthur. He looked at the crowd who were all looking at Sadie with deferential respect. He looked back at Sadie. No, Harrison whispered. No, you're the waitress. I saw you carry a tray. You have grease on your apron. I own the club. Harrison. Sadie Serafina said, her voice echoing through the hall. I own the building it's in. I own the land your office sits on. And as of this morning's audit, she pulled the receipt from the previous night out of her purse, the one with the date of the Wall Street crash written on it. I own the bank that holds the mortgage on your precious sterling spire. Harrison felt his knees give way. He grabbed the podium for support. Serafina, I like to know who I'm doing business with, Serafina said, pacing around him like a tiger circling a wounded gazelle. You see, people wear masks, Harrison. You wear a $3,000 suit to hide the fact that you're insecure and over-leveraged. I wore a waitress uniform to see if you had a soul. She stopped in front of him. The entire room was mesmerized. And what did I find? She held up a finger. Cruelty. You snapped your fingers at me like I was a dog. She held up a second finger. Arrogance. You tried to bribe me with a night out, thinking my dignity cost less than a Prix Fix menu. She held up a third finger. Incompetence. You didn't even do your due diligence. If you had checked the board of directors for the charity you're trying to impress, you would have seen my face on page 1 of the brochure. Harrison looked down at the brochure on the podium. He hadn't opened it. He flipped it open with trembling fingers. There on the first page was a portrait of the woman standing in front of him. Serafina Kensington. I didn't know, Harrison stammered. It was a joke, the waitress thing. I was trying to help you. You called me simple into a microphone in front of 500 people, Serafina replied icily. You used me as a prop to boost your own ego. You didn't want to help me. You wanted to own me. She turned back to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sterling spoke about the future, about the Sterling Spire. She looked at Arthur. Arthur, what is the status of the lease renewal for the West Side docks? Arthur cleared his throat. The lease agreement contains a moral turpitude clause, Ms. Kensington. It states that the Kensington Trust may void any agreement if the counterparty demonstrates behavior that brings disrepute to the community or values of the trust. And would you say, Serafina asked, her eyes boring into Harrison, that publicly humiliating a service worker, regardless of who she turned out to be, violates those values? I would say it is a textbook definition, ma'am, Arthur replied. Then the lease is denied, Serafina declared. Harrison gasped. You can't. I've sunk $40 million into the prep work. If you deny the lease, the project dies. If the project dies, the bank calls the loans. The bank? Serafina smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. Is already calling the loans. My auditors flagged your liquidity issues last night. You're overextended, Harrison. You're broke. You just don't know it yet. Harrison looked around the room, desperate for an ally. Carter, Senator. Senator Bob looked at the ceiling. Carter was aggressively studying the floral arrangement. No one would meet his eye. Harrison Sterling was radioactive. You ruined me, Harrison whispered, his voice cracking. Over a drink, over a bad tip. No. Serafina stepped close to him, leaning in so only he could hear the final blow. "You ruined yourself, Harrison. I just held up the mirror." She pulled the diamond necklace from her neck, the one he had dismissed as a cheap prop, unaware it was the Star of Delft, and unclasped it. "Security!" she called out. Gregor and 2 other massive guards stepped onto the stage. "Please escort Mr. Sterling out. He doesn't have a ticket, and this is a private event." Gregor grabbed Harrison by the arm. "Let's go, sir. Don't make a scene." Harrison Sterling, the wolf of real estate. The man who thought he could buy the world was dragged off the stage. He looked back one last time. He saw Serafina Kensington standing in the spotlight. She wasn't looking at him. She was signaling the conductor. "Maestro," she said calmly, "please continue. I believe we were promised a waltz." The music swelled. The crowd, recovering from the shock, erupted into applause, not for Harrison, but for the woman who had just executed him without spilling a drop of champagne. As the music played, Serafina walked back to her table. She sat down, picked up her fork, and finally took a bite of the squab. "You know," she said to a stunned Beatrice Vanderbilt. "He was right about one thing. It is a little dry. I'll have to talk to Jean-Luc." 3 months later, the rain in Manhattan felt different to Harrison Sterling. It didn't feel like a dramatic backdrop for his ambition anymore. It just felt wet, cold, and relentless. He stood on the sidewalk of 57th Street, his collar turned up against the wind. The bespoke Tom Ford suit was gone, sold to a consignment store in Soho to pay for legal fees. He was wearing a generic off-the-rack jacket that was slightly too tight in the shoulders. He looked across the street. The construction site where the Sterling spire was supposed to pierce the clouds was buzzing with activity. But the sign, the massive gold-lettered sign announcing his legacy, was gone. In its place was a sleek, understated rendering of a new project, the Kensington Community Arts and Housing Centre. Harrison felt a bitter taste in his mouth. It wasn't just that she had taken his project. It was that she had turned his monument of capitalism into a non-profit. It was the ultimate insult to everything he believed in. He checked his phone. It was an older model. His latest iPhone had been part of the asset seizure. He had a notification from LinkedIn. "Carter Vance viewed your profile." Harrison scoffed. Carter, his best friend, hadn't answered a single call since the night of the gala. Nobody had. The senator, the investors, the models, they had all vanished like smoke the moment the Wall Street Journal ran the headline, "Sterling Silver Turns to Rust." The collapse of a real estate bubble. Harrison was toxic. He was radioactive. He wasn't just broke. He was a joke. The video of him being dragged off the stage at the Met had gone viral, remixing his Simple Girl speech with Curb Your Enthusiasm music. He needed a job. He had applied to boutique firms, then mid-tier firms, then property management companies in Jersey. No one wanted the man who tried to con Serafina Kensington. He looked down at the address on his phone. He had one interview left. It was a humiliating long shot, but he was desperate. His rent was due in 2 days, and he was living in a studio apartment in the Bronx that was smaller than his old walk-in closet. He walked toward the building. It was Lobsidian. The irony was thick enough to choke on, but he had heard they were looking for a new floor manager. He knew the layout. He knew the clientele. Maybe he could convince them that his experience was an asset. He walked to the service entrance, the same door he had breezed through so arrogantly months ago to find Sadie. He knocked. The door opened. It was Marco. Marco looked at Harrison. He looked at the cheap jacket, the scuffed shoes, the desperate look in the eyes that used to hold so much contempt. "Harrison," Marco said, not unkindly, but without deference. "Marco." Harrison forced a smile. "I saw the listing, for the floor manager position. I know it's unexpected, but I know this club better than anyone. I can handle the VIPs. I speak their language." Marco sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "We filled the manager position this morning, Harrison." Harrison's shoulders slumped. "Oh, right. Well, thanks anyway." He turned to leave. "Wait," Marco called out. Harrison turned back, a flicker of hope in his chest. "We do have an opening," Marco said slowly. "It's not management. We're short-staffed on the floor tonight. A busboy called in sick. It's minimum wage plus a share of the tip pool. You'd be clearing tables, polishing glass. Heavy lifting." Harrison stared at him. A busboy. He wanted Harrison Sterling to wipe crumbs off the tables of men he used to drink with. Harrison started to refuse. His pride reared its head, screaming at him to tell Marco to go to hell. But then he remembered the eviction notice on his counter. He remembered the empty fridge. He remembered that pride didn't pay for heat. "I'll take it," Harrison whispered. "Okay." Marco nodded. "Go to the locker room, grab an apron." And Harrison, "Yeah, polish the shoes. Ms. Kensington pays attention to details." An hour later, Harrison was on the floor. He was invisible. The men in the club men he used to do deals with didn't even look at him as he poured their water and cleared their empty plates. He was just a body in a uniform. Around 9 p.m. the room went quiet. Harrison looked up from the side station where he was folding napkins. She walked in. Serafina Kensington was wearing a navy business suit, sharp and elegant. She wasn't playing the waitress tonight. She was the owner. She walked through the room with a natural authority that Harrison had never possessed even with all his money. She sat at table 4, the same table where they had met. Marco rushed over. "Ms. Kensington, the usual." "Yes, Marco. Thank you." She opened a file folder and started reading. She looked serene, untouchable. Harrison felt a sick sensation in his stomach. He should hide. He should run to the kitchen. But he was frozen. "Boy," a voice called from table 4. Harrison flinched. It wasn't Serafina. It was her guest, a young, arrogant tech CEO in a hoodie who had just joined her. "Boy, we need water over here." The tech CEO snapped, not looking up from his phone. Harrison hesitated. Then he grabbed the silver pitcher. He walked over to table 4. His hands were shaking. He poured the water into the tech CEO's glass. Then he moved to Serafina's glass. As he poured, the ice clinked. Serafina looked up. Her green eyes met his. Time stopped. Harrison waited for her to laugh, to mock him, to point him out to the tech CEO and say, "Look, that's the man who tried to buy me." He waited for the anger. But there was no anger in her eyes. There was no mockery. There was nothing. She looked at him with the polite, distant indifference one gives to a stranger. She didn't recognize him, or rather, she chose not to. To her, he was no longer Harrison Sterling, the enemy. He was just the help. "Thank you," she said softly. She turned back to her file. Harrison stood there for a second, devastated by the mercy of her indifference. It was worse than hatred. It confirmed that he was truly, utterly insignificant. "You missed a spot," the tech CEO grumbled, pointing to a drop of water on the table. Harrison looked at the drop. He looked at Serafina, who was ignoring the world building her empire. He pulled a rag from his apron. "I'm sorry, sir," Harrison Sterling said, bowing his head. "I'll clean it up right away." He wiped the table, and as he walked back to the kitchen, the heavy swing doors closing behind him, he realized that for the first time in his life, he was earning an honest living. And that is how the Wolf of Wall Street ended up clearing tables in the very den he once tried to rule. It's a brutal lesson, but a necessary one. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful, and the person serving your coffee might just be the one holding the keys to your future. Harrison Sterling learned too late that dignity isn't found in a bank account, and that you should never ever judge a book or a waitress by its cover. What do you think? Did Serafina go too far, or did Harrison get exactly what he deserved? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you've ever had a boss like Harrison, or if you've ever been underestimated like Sadie, let me know your story. If you enjoyed this twist-filled saga, please destroy that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Share this with a friend who needs a reminder to stay humble. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.